96% of tech marketers say that they have a content strategy, but only about 29% think it works. Where do you think the gap is?
It's very easy for content marketers to work in silos. For such a long time, we were obsessed with feeding the content machine. AI is great, and I think it just gives us more room as creators to do what we do best instead of getting hung up on all of these small tasks that we feel like we have to do to move the needle. Popularization of Gen AI, we are seeing search change at an exponential rate. So I think conversational search is the future.
Today on Marketing Growth Fuel, we're joined by Kait Spong, Senior Content Strategy Manager at Bloomreach, and a go-to expert for brands looking to elevate their content from just busy to breakthrough. From shaping content systems across data, AI, software as a service, real estate, hospitality, and now e-commerce, Kait has helped some of the most complex brands show up with clarity, consistency, and real strategic voice. At Bloomreach, she leads initiatives that turn technical product stories into accessible, engaging narratives across the funnel. Whether it's scaling brand voice across teams or building content strategies that don't just perform but persist, Kait brings a fresh, practical lens to content in the AI era. If you're trying to future-proof your content strategy while staying true to your brand, this conversation is your blueprint. Let's get started.
Welcome back to Marketing Growth Fuel, the podcast where we go beyond funnels and frameworks to uncover the people and the purpose behind great marketing. Today's guest is a seasoned content strategist, editorial leader, and an advocate for empathetic storytelling in the age of AI and automation. Welcome to the show, Kait.
Yes, Vic, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Kate, 2025 is turning out to be very different. But one thing that hasn't changed is content marketing. It remains the cornerstone of marketing strategies. There's this data that highlights a stark disconnect. About 96% of tech marketers say that they have a content strategy, but only about 29% think it works. Where do you think the gap is, and how can teams move from having a strategy that looks good on paper to the one that really delivers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like that is one of the hardest things, right? And I did not come from a marketing background. I'm
Hmm.
actually from an English background. I'm a writer. So this was kind of one of the hardest lessons for me to learn starting out as a copywriter. I think it could be several things. The first thing I kind of notice is that brands are leading with product led thinking instead of audience led thinking. And that can
Hmm.
be really easy to get wrapped up into. You're giving kind of directives. We need to talk about this subject or that. And it can be really easy to get super focused on the product instead of
Hmm.
who am I actually writing this content for?
Yeah.
Um, I'd say another problem is distribution. I
Hmm.
think, you create content too. We all come from kind of different backgrounds,
Yeah.
and it can be kind of easy to get wrapped up into the creation portion of content
Yeah.
and get excited about that and just kind of think, oh, I'm just going to create this and hit publish. But you
Yeah.
really need to create that distribution strategy prior and think of how you're going to promote that content and
Hmm.
get the eyes on it that you
Right.
want. So I'd say that's another disconnect. And I think one of the biggest, and this is something I had to learn, is it's very easy for content marketers to work in silos. I'm
Yeah.
sure you
Yeah,
understand that.
yeah. That is one thing that I definitely agree with you on a lot more. But yeah,
It's kind of easy to see how that happens because you're creating, you're writing. So it's simple to kind of get sucked into your zone, like your creative zone, and shut everyone else out. But I think cross
right.
functionality is one
Hmm.
of the biggest like tools you can have in your toolkit, and regularly communicating with your sales team, your CSM team, your product
Hmm.
marketing team to
Hmm.
see like what are the questions that prospects are asking during sales cycles, what are the features that customers are kind of hung up on, like they're excited to use but don't really know how to get started. Those
Yeah.
conversations can be so fruitful in the types of content you should be delivering to your audience.
No, I completely agree with you, Kate. I think one of the things that's really stood out for me is, you called out the disconnect between creating content for the brand or the product or the service, as against creating it for the audience. And we are so caught up in perfecting the content. Sometimes we really forget to ask, is this even helpful for the people that we are trying to reach? And that kind of brings me to something else that I want to ask, right? So I think what's happening is, despite having more tools than ever, about 52% of tech marketers still say that their content is not driving action. uh, what do you think is happening there? How does one go about creating content that actually turns into engagement and into real results?
Yeah, I think that kind of just like goes off what we were just talking about. Like as a creator, you can get really excited about an idea
Hmm.
and just get so wrapped up in like, I want to create this. I think this is going to be awesome. But you have to kind of sit with yourself and ask, why am I creating this content to begin with?
Yeah.
Who is it serving? Um, what purpose is it fulfilling? I think that's really important to kind of just get down to like the bare bones before you even
Yeah.
start creating. I think another thing, and this is kind of something I learned at my time at Bloomreach, but it can get really easy to get, again, wrapped up in that creator cycle and not really think about the customer journey.
Hmm.
So, like, I want someone to read this blog, but you can't just link to a demo, and
Yeah.
I think that's like a problem we had for a while. So
Hmm.
we started to be like more intentional. Okay, they're going to read this anchor piece. What do we want them to do after that? Because
Right.
they're not always going to be at the point of their buying journey to be ready to view a demo. So
Yeah.
we've been very intentional about creating content that ladders up to each other. So we've been very intentional about, creating content that ladders up to the other pieces of content to take our audience along that journey and kind of get them to where we want to go.
Yeah.
And that is in line, I feel, with the marketing funnel, right? Like we see so much stuff on LinkedIn lately, like the marketing funnel doesn't work, the marketing
Yeah.
funnel is dead. And I think, like, I don't know about how you feel about it, but I think there's kind of a valid point to that in some sense that the marketing funnel is created for marketers and that's how marketers think about content, but that is not exactly how your audience is considering content.
Mm-hmm.
So the model I kind of like to go off now is more of an intent based model.
Okay.
Thinking about like where my audience is in that journey. Like, is it kind of lower intent where they kind of know they have this problem, but don't really know how to describe it yet and need a little more
Right.
education? Is it medium or higher intent where they're getting ready to pull the trigger on their purchase? I
Hmm.
mean, the thing about SaaS is especially in enterprise, it's such a long buying process that can take
Yeah,
8, 9 months, a
9 months.
year.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's very, very non-linear. So I
right.
think we kind of, in a way, I'm not saying let's get out of tofu, mofu, bofu, but
Mhm.
let's kind of push ourselves to consider how long that journey actually is and creating the pieces that will help our customer along, educate them about their problem and how your solution can solve it. And then I guess the last thing I would say is write content and distribute it where your audience is. I
Mm.
think, for such a long time, we were obsessed with feeding the content machine. We have to feed these SERPs certain amount of content based
Yeah.
on XYZ keywords and get wrapped up into writing for machines. And I'm not saying that's still not important, but with Gen AI, it's kind of giving us leeway to
Mhm.
be more flexible and consider, where is our audience actually living? For
Right.
Bloomreach, it's LinkedIn. We've
Yeah.
seen a lot of success on that platform in nurturing different prospects. But
Yeah.
for other businesses, it may be other platforms, and you just kind of have to figure it out for yourself.
I completely agree with you. You know how the sales funnel perhaps needs to be more intent based. I have come across the neo funnels that they call inverted funnels as well. And there's so much out there today that people are now referring to say that maybe perhaps the older, maybe the 4 P's and the 7 P's of marketing don't even uh, or are
Yeah.
ceasing to exist. And to parts I agree, and to parts I feel, what I think eme they have a more evolved definition than what they had back in the day. And to the other part, that we kind of touched about was this piece where you know I think every brand now needs to figure out what their channel strategy is going to be, uh,
Mhm.
as against the content strategy as well, right? So for example, how you mentioned Bloomreach has a lot of audience on LinkedIn that they want to tap into, and that's where their audience lives. Maybe perhaps that's the only channel that they need to build a content strategy around. But
Yeah.
then if you were to take this to Instagram, the kind of content that you would create would be very different. And I see a lot of brands doing this actually. At some point, at Techdogs also we do the same thing. Is what really thinking is that, see, the end consumer who's buying today is platform agnostic. And what I mean by that is, I as an individual or you as an individual might make our purchase decisions based on certain inputs, certain researches on certain platforms. But at the end of the day, we are still humans going back to every platform and consuming some sort of a content. And I
Yeah.
think that's where the ball changes.
Exactly. There's just like so much content out there presented in different ways. And I think it's driving businesses to be more creative in how they
Hmm.
present their content. It's like we were so obsessed with marketing to this business for a while. Well, people exist behind the business, and
Absolutely.
your audience is getting younger and younger, and they may not exactly resonate with, an ebook.
Yeah.
So I love seeing companies branch out, making podcasts, creating newsletters, getting on top of TikTok trends. That's what resonates with me as someone in tech. Seeing what other brands are doing, I'm more likely to remember you if you're willing to kind of break out of the box and experiment with your content.
I think the biggest shift is where audiences are actually discovering content now. And that's something that I think all marketers need to be aware of, because then that kind of informs your approach to creating content. I think because of the channels and the approaches, I also feel the way we've kind of, for the longest time, measured the impact of content is also changing. And that brings me to the next point, right? So marketers still kind of find it difficult to connect content to ROI. Why do you think that disconnect is there? Is it because we are living in a new age where the metrics are outdated? And if the older metrics are wrong, or aren't working anymore, then what should we be tracking to show value to the stakeholders?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest Achilles heel of content marketing is put up on this pedestal as this is such a valuable realm of marketing, but it's like you always have to prove why you should exist. For example, there are riffs. It feels like brand or content marketing is first on the chopping block. And maybe that's because like we have issues in proving our value, but I think it's just kind of a misunderstanding of what content marketing is. And we're almost conflating it with performance marketing, where we want these direct results right away.
Right.
We're low on pipe before we hit the end of the quarter. But that's just not how content marketing really works. Content marketing functions as a part of brand, not so much demand gen, even though we've seen, people kind of relabel demand gen as brand gen in the
Yeah.
past few
New one.
years. Yeah, definitely. But I think it's just like a fundamental misunderstanding of like how content marketing should function on a team. I think another thing is maybe like we were just talking about all these new formats with, short form video, podcasts, newsletters.
Right.
There's a lot of, new types of content people are experimenting with right now, and they may not know exactly how to measure that based
Hmm.
on, like you're saying, kind of like these outdated models of measurement, because there's such newer forms of content, especially in the B2B space that we're experimenting with right now.
Right.
Um, so I think like sometimes that can be a little bit of a hurdle of itself. You want to try these more creative types of content. I think my argument would be like it's not always going to show up right away,
Yeah.
but ultimately, content marketing and brand marketing helps your performance marketing, because people who are more familiar with your brand are
Yeah.
more likely to engage with your brand.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's not always going to pay off right away. I
Right.
think another issue with that is some teams see content marketing kind of as this service function. I
Yeah.
need this deck polish. I need this ebook for my campaign.
Yeah.
And that can, again, get you wrapped up in this creator cycle where you're constantly creating and fulfilling these requests for different teams that you don't even have time to be strategic about your content.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's kind of another issue I see with that. But when it comes to outdated metrics, I think you just have to decide what is the goal for my team right now. For
Hmm.
us at Bloomreach, when I first came in, it was brand recognition because we had just had an acquisition of a European company.
Yeah.
So not only did we have to kind of reintroduce ourselves to that market, but we
Hmm.
also had to become known in the US market. So our
Hmm.
metrics, 2 years ago look very different than what we're measuring and focused on today.
I have this analogy that I give to the team here. I always think of content marketers as the Dark Knight the business has, as against the Superman that they're expecting it to be. In many ways, I think over the last, I think 5 6 years, um, obviously there's a shift from seeing content just being a support role, to start being more strategic, like you said. And then, how do you look beyond, maybe attributions that are direct, to more signals that are human, right? I think the next question I would love to ask you is going to be about when we talk about brand, uh, it's easy to jump into visual identity, something that you guys had to do, when you kind of bought a company in the Europe, and you have to again position yourselves differently in the European market, but also then do that in the US market. But when you look at brand, it's about visual identities, the logo, the fonts, the colors, the style. But I also feel that there is a deeper layer to it, right? It's also about, how does a brand show up in its content? How does it show up across channels? uh, so what do you think is branded content looking like in 2025? Especially because this entire space is dominated by AI. And do you think the brand voice is going to become more important? And the most important differentiator, if I was to ask.
I'm a big proponent of using AI, and that may get me some hate. I think it's like such a big discussion on LinkedIn right now, kind of discussing how can we detect who's using AI versus who's not using AI. It's the M dash, it's the series of three, it's
Yeah.
these words or whatnot. But ultimately, AI is a collaborator for content marketers, and we shouldn't feel ashamed for using a tool um, that's going to help us create better content and be more efficient. So that's my little diatribe there. I also think, ironically, like AI is going to give us the space to, for example, be more authentic in our brand. People are going to be looking for authenticity, unique voices, hot takes, things like that, kind of more reactive content. I think AI will give content marketers the space to be more reactive in the moment to certain trends or topics that are happening in your industry. For us, it's e-commerce, so trends are constantly happening. I think it will also give us a space to be more creative
Absolutely.
because, with AI, we'll see a lot of sameness happening, same format, same way of saying things. But again, ironically, it opens up a space for us to have more room to experiment with
Absolutely.
different formats. That's how I got to work on our podcast, for example, because
Hmm.
we kind of had AI helping us in terms of SEO content, optimizing for search engines. So I had more room to branch out and start working on, the podcast with two of my colleagues.
Nice.
So I think that's another, differentiator in the AI space that will happen because of AI.
Mhm.
And then I think another thing that it will give us room to do that can also serve as a differentiator is we can actually create more experiences.
Got it.
People, yeah, they'll read a blog, they'll download an ebook. I do it all of the time, but people are looking for those community spaces to meet others like in their niche, to
Hmm.
network, to socialize. I think we're all kind of craving that connection, especially after the pandemic, even though it was 5 years ago. But we all kind of got out of that space of, going to events and interacting with brands and people. And I think that's one of the things that sets Bloomreach apart for me personally is that we'll always show up at a conference. Like we recently did Shop Talk in Las Vegas, and we just had this two-story monochrome bright yellow booth that everyone kept talking about on the showroom floor.
Yeah.
And we even got like coverage from that, from different publications that we didn't pay for, but just by showing up in like a very creative,
In a
bold
way.
way,
Yeah.
with our events and our activations, we had people talking. So all in all, I think AI is great. And I think it just gives us more room as creators to do what we do best instead of getting hung up on all of these small tasks that we feel like we have to do to move the needle.
And I completely agree. I think AI has democratized creativity. At the same time, it is allowing us to create more experiences, more just experiment with whatever we are doing, as against what we were doing earlier. Okay. Um, and I think that's taking marketing to a really different level now. I think one other thing that is happening very interestingly is that there are so many short-term trends that your audiences today want to learn about. Okay, versus the evergreen topics that we know as content marketers are going to be relevant for the larger period of time. For example, as a content marketer, do you kind of say that let's drop everything to cover this now? So, for example, you
Mhm.
talked about something like an agentic AI that you introduced and it perhaps didn't perform well, or knowing that few from now that this content might be relevant, so let's talk about it now. So how do you balance those two aspects, short-term trends versus evergreen content?
Yeah, it's definitely been a learning process in e-commerce where I feel like trends are happening every day. A few months ago, it was the TikTok ban in the US. We were all obsessing over, and what are brands going to do without TikTok shop? That's become, such a pillar of how certain brands like D2C will sell their products. And now in the US, we're worried about, the tariff situation.
Absolutely.
So it feels like something every second, and it can be a little overwhelming, but in a good way because I think it's super interesting market. My tip would be, and this is what we've done at Bloomreach, is establishing different content pillars. Every brand wants to be known for certain topics, and I
Mm,
think the sooner you decide what your brand wants to be known for,
mm,
the better, because it makes it easier to navigate every type of piece of content you're creating, whether it's evergreen, whether it's trend based. If you have those content pillars and that content consistency, and everyone is talking about the same topics across marketing, sales, CSM, product, then it will give you kind of the backbone to navigate different trends
mm,
better because you'll always have this resonating voice underneath it. It will always sound consistent like your brand, no matter what you're writing about. So that would be my first tip. I think my second would be there's so much content happening, as we've said many times in this conversation. It's impossible to interject your voice on every single topic.
mm,
So I think you kind of have to filter out what's important to you as a brand
mm.
because you don't have to necessarily add your voice to the noise if it's something that doesn't resonate with those core pillars that you want to be known for.
Yeah.
So it can be a strategic practice, especially when you have different stakeholders involved in your content strategy who are wanting you to talk about certain topics.
Mm,
But as long as you stay true to those core pillars, it should give you an easier time kind of deciding I should talk about this right now versus this other
mm.
topic.
Absolutely. And it makes sense, right? Because, we don't need to chase things blindly. In many ways, you have to have pillars that you work with. Now, I think what's also happening on the side is that, there's this piece where there is a lot of movement towards conversational search in e-commerce, just typing something out, through natural language, saying, what, show me dresses under $2,000, that ship by
Yes.
Friday. Do you think that's the future of product discovery, or is that just a trend?
Yeah, it's something we're really excited about. I've been in the product discovery space about 3 years, and it was always changing rapidly. But
Mm,
with, you know, the popularization of Gen AI, we are seeing search change at, an exponential rate. So I think conversational search is the future. It caters to how people actually are searching, how people actually talk. I actually wrote about this in a recent newsletter. I remember like my elementary school computer lab, like when and this is probably going to show my age, but we were taught about Ask Jeeves. I don't know if they had
mm,
that were in India, but we would basically go to computer lab and learn how to interact with a search engine. And search as we've known it for the past 25 years is more humans learning how to speak like machines
Hmm.
because it was so based on keyword matching that we had to take our language and tailor it down to specific words and phrases to find the products or the content or the knowledge that we were researching through these search
Hmm.
engines. With conversational, it's leaving room for more natural language in the product or just the discovery experience. So it's more focused on people and how people think and talk.
Hmm.
So I definitely see it as um our CEO Raj talks about this a lot, but search was built for people who had clear intent, who know exactly
Like, yeah.
what they're looking for, can type it exactly into the search bar and pull up those products. But for, I think it's like the 90% of people who have an idea, like, oh, I need a new pair of trainers for the gym, but not like exactly sure what brand or colorway that they want,
Hmm.
it could lead to missed opportunities for brands because I don't know about you, but I've definitely gotten frustrated with a search before. I'm searching for those trainers, but I'm filtering, I'm scrolling, I'm clicking on the different pages and not finding exactly what I want, and I'll
Right.
abandon that. But with conversational, the thing is, like, it just doesn't exist in a chat box as we knew it 10 years ago, but it can be throughout the entire journey, whether it's the search bar, whether it's on the product page or the checkout page, and it can pick up different intent signals. Are you switching between products? Are you typing in new phrases again and again to try to find what you're looking
Hmm.
for? Are you playing with the filters in a certain way? It can pick up on those behaviors and interject with
Yeah.
clarifying questions like a in-store clerk would
Hmm.
to guide you in the right direction of that product you may be searching for. It also has the ability to pick up on um, certain nuances and verticals, like how people are searching for, a new couch may not be the same as someone who's searching for a new television. So it
Right.
can pick up on those very high intent verticals where people are ready to purchase, but not quite
Hmm.
sure exactly the product, and offer help where the customer may need it most. So I think it's going
Hmm.
to be a real game changer for brands and e-commerce and beyond.
I think the closest experience that I've had to conversational search, in many ways, is Amazon Rufus. I don't know if you guys have that.
Yes.
And I thought it was pretty nifty. And I think it's very similar to the kind of conversations that I perhaps have with ChatGPT, to be honest. Sometimes I am seeking and not searching. And I think Raj made a very good point there. I think search was built for people who had intent. They were really looking at, I want a pair of trainers, you know, and then they knew what they wanted. But if I was just casually browsing, I really wanted to understand what fits, then I think it's a different ball game. But yeah, I think that's a very thoughtful way to look at it. So I think just to kind of summarize this section, and these segments, I think it brings us to a complete full circle at the moment, right? So whether it's evergreen content, or it's the messaging, or the way people are searching, or the shift that we are seeing in the searches, I think it's all about really understanding what your consumer is, what their personas are, understanding their behaviors, and then building around it, right? And then not certainly not the other way around, right? So not right for algorithms anymore, but right for conversations, content, and clarity. And I think the brands that are really doing that are the ones that are converting. But I think the next segment, which is the segment that I love the most, is the segment we call the this or that. marketing mashup, as we call it. And what I would love for you to do is be completely candid. I'm going to give you two-word options. Just go for whatever feels is is what you're leaning towards. Whenever you're ready, just let me know and I'll have a crack at it.
All right, let's do it. I love a hot seat.
All right, TikTok or Instagram?
I'm going to say TikTok.
AI avatar or human TikToker?
Human. Definitely.
Okay, Gen AI content or handcrafted content?
I guess I'll go with human.
Paid podcasts or branded podcasts?
Oh, branded podcast.
A 5-second ad hook or long form storytelling?
I'm gonna have to go with long form storytelling. Just speaks to the content marketer in me.
Absolutely. A newsletter CTA button or a inline hyperlink?
Newsletter. I'm a newsletter stan now, as I know you are too.
Okay. Pre-scheduled content calendar or real-time posting?
Real time posting. I think the calendar is becoming too rigid.
SEO first, blog writing or thought leadership point of views?
Thought leadership point of views. We all love the C-suite thought leadership hot takes.
We have an ongoing debate on this, the next one. So creator-led brands or brand-led creators?
Just what I've been seeing with the in the B2B space lately, I'm going to say creator-led brands because the brands with creators are really standing out right now.
Keyword density or matching user intent?
I think after the discussion today, I'm going to have to say matching user intent.
Okay, slick brand templates or behind the scenes content?
Behind the scenes content, I feel people want to see how content is being made.
And the final one, marketing led community building or product led community building?
Marketing sets the stage at Bloomreach, so I'm going to say marketing led community building because content is community.
This has been such a thoughtful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing insights on everything, right from content strategy to brand voice and, how do you navigate everything in this age of AI. I'm so happy that you joined us today. I know we are leaving our listeners with a lot of meaningful takeaways. So thank you so much once again. Really appreciate this. Any parting thoughts that you might have?
No, I mean, thank you so much for having me. You know, I'm a big fan of your newsletter and I've been wanting to collaborate in some way for a while. So I am super excited to have done this with you. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much once again.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, or your favorite podcast app. Catch past episodes and more at techdogs.com. See you next time.